I'm Nathaniel Stinnett, and I'm the founder of the Environmental Voter Project. We're a nonpartisan nonprofit that's trying to address the environmental turnout problem. What we've realized is environmentalists actually aren't very good voters. And so all we're focused on is finding environmentalists who don't vote and then applying the latest behavioral science to turn them into consistent voters. Big data killed the soccer mom. Whereas 6 or 8 years ago, political campaigns targeted broad demographic groups, now, for better or for worse, we're living in a very Orwellian society where political campaigns can target individuals. Big data gives political campaigns and other nonprofits the ability to target individual voters. And that's a very, very powerful tool, because any campaign at any given moment can know that Joanne Smith on Main Street could be persuaded to vote for their candidate, whereas her next door neighbor, who may be the same gender and the same age and have a lot of the same demographic markers, cannot be persuaded to vote for that candidate. So big data has completely revolutionized politics and made it very, very different than it was even 6 or 8 years ago. The dirty secret about politics that a lot of people don't realize, but every politician certainly knows, is the following. Who you vote for is secret, but whether you vote or not is public information. It's public information. Anybody can go to town hall or city hall and look at the voter file to see who votes and who doesn't vote. And what we've realized by doing a lot of research, and it's not just us, is that there's actually a silent majority of environmentalists out there. Tens of millions of Americans not only care about climate change, but list it as one of their very, very top priorities. But the problem is, they don't vote. We're coming to realize that environmentalists aren't very good voters. In fact, at the Environmental Voter Project, we identified 15.78 million super environmentalists who didn't vote in the 2014 midterms. We identified 10.1 million environmentalists who didn't even vote in the 2012 presidential election. So some people can view this as frustrating, but it's actually an enormous opportunity. We've done a pretty good job at persuading people to care about climate change. Now we just need to get them to vote. So there are a lot of ways to identify someone as being an environmentalist. We have a very high bar at the Environmental Voter Project. We're going after the tip of the spear. We're trying to identify people who list climate change and other environmental issues as either their number 1 most important priority or their number 2 most important priority. Now, that's not to say that there aren't plenty of people who care deeply about climate change but would list it as a number 5 priority. There are probably millions of them. But we think the most efficient thing to do right now is to find these people who list it as a top priority and make sure that they vote, because those people will move opinion makers. They really, really will. That's right. So we're identifying these people as environmentalists off of the voter file, and then we're deciding to not go after the people who are already good voters. We want to go after the people who are bad voters, because there's something interesting about political campaigns. People always think of politics as being awash in money. And don't get me wrong, politics absolutely corrupts the political system. But campaigns actually have a pretty limited amount of money and a very limited amount of time to get their candidate across the finish line. And so campaigns only ever talk to people who are really likely to vote. So what we realized at the Environmental Voter Project is no one's talking to the majority of environmentalists. So that's what we do. We don't care about who wins the next election. We care about finding these super environmentalists who don't vote and just changing their habits a bit and nudging them into voting. So there are a lot of important things that we as individuals can do to protect the environment and to fight climate change. Purchasing habits, transportation habits, things like that. But Personally, I obviously feel very strongly about voting. And I want to be very clear about this. Your vote is not just a transaction. You're not just trying to give one more vote in some huge tally to your favored candidate. Your vote is actually much, much more powerful than that. Because remember, whether you vote or not is public information. And every time an environmentalist votes, that's a big red beacon on their public voter file for the whole world to see, but most importantly, for politicians to see. And believe me, there is nothing that motivates a politician more than the prospect of winning. And so if millions of environmentalists start voting, that shows up in the public voter files, and politicians respond accordingly. They absolutely do. And so one of the most impactful things that anybody can do to affect the environment is to vote. And it's also easy. It's so easy. It takes the average American only 20 minutes to vote. That's so much less than one bike ride to work or recycling for an entire week. It's a very easy, impactful way to address climate change. Students don't just need to vote. Students need to be loud and proud about voting. If there's one thing that the latest generation of social scientists, and in particular behavioral scientists, have realized, is that we continue living in high school for the rest of our lives. Peer pressure matters, and social pressure matters. And so, if I vote and make sure that all of my friends know that I voted, and make sure that all of my friends know that voting is important to me as an environmentalist, that has an enormous impact. Because what we're coming to realize is even people who don't vote view the act of voting as a good thing. Americans still buy in to the societal norm that being a voter is a good thing. So not only is it important for student environmentalists to vote and try to fix this environmental turnout problem we have, but they've got to be loud and proud about it. Talk about it on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Snapchat. Let the whole world know that you express yourself as an environmentalist not just by riding a bike or recycling or putting solar panels on your roof, but by voting. Voting is an important way to express yourself as an environmentalist. I am very optimistic about our environmental future. Talking just about climate change, I mean, there's no doubt this is an existential problem. This is a huge, huge problem. But what it is not is some disease for which we don't have a cure, or a war where our enemy can't possibly be defeated. We actually know the technological advances that can wean us from fossil fuels. We actually have the policy answers to address this really huge, awful problem. We just need enough people to decide to dedicate themselves that we as a country and we as a world adopt these answers. And so in many ways, I'm very, very optimistic because we already have the answers. And there's another important thing to stress. This is a huge opportunity. I mean, yes, it's scary. Yes. It's scary to think that we might be the last generation that can solve this problem. But how many generations have the opportunity to be heroes? We know how to solve this problem. And politically, we know that we already have an environmental majority. So once we as a generation decide that we are going to vote with our values and really dedicate ourselves to solving this, well, the solutions are already there. It's just a battle for the hearts and minds now. And that's absolutely a battle that can be won. And it's a great opportunity. On the 2012 Obama campaign, 40% of the headquarters staff was made up of the data and analytics team. 40% of the headquarters staff. Politics is not just about knocking on doors or making TV advertisements now. It's a very limited resource business. And so having computer scientists and data scientists and even people who are just used to living in an environment where they can really easily manipulate data and then code solutions is extraordinarily important. Extraordinarily important. And that doesn't just go for political campaigns. That goes for environmental nonprofits. That goes for advocacy groups. That goes for scientific organizations that are trying to find environmental solutions. Because we now have the computing power and the data available to solve problems in a far more efficient way than we could even 5 or 10 years ago. And the people who need to apply that expertise to help environmental groups solve those problems don't go to work at the Microsofts or Googles or IBMs anymore. They go to work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or a presidential campaign, or some other nonprofit, or an environmental group that's out into the field. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for computer science majors, but even other majors at MIT who want to take their facility with coding and using data and apply it in a real-world way that allows environmental organizations to efficiently find solutions that they can't do at the moment. I've worked on political campaigns and advocacy nonprofits for over a decade, and there was one thing in particular that always really, really frustrated me, and that was this. When you poll likely voters in any election, whether it be city council or president or something in between, and you ask those voters to prioritize the issues they care most about, the environment and climate change is almost always at the bottom of the list. And that has a huge impact on how policy is made at every level, because if voters don't care about a set of issues, how on earth can we expect politicians to care about those issues? And this always really, really frustrated me because I cared about climate change and the environment, and the candidates I worked with did. But it would be malpractice for us to talk about it. If you're running a campaign, you only have one goal, just one, and that's getting to 50% plus one of the vote on one day. That's it. And you can never, ever justify spending your precious time and money talking about an issue that voters don't care about. The goal of the Environmental Voter Project is to put ourselves out of business. When environmentalists start voting, I'd be perfectly happy to move on to doing something else. There are lots of great organizations that try to persuade voters to vote for the right person. We don't need another group to do that. There are great nonprofits that lobby policymakers to make sure they know what the right, laws are and what the right things are to support. We don't need another organization to do that. I want to put myself out of business. Just like the goal of every homeless shelter should be to no longer have homeless people, the goal of the Environmental Voter Project is to have environmentalists vote as often as gun owners do. Right now, in the United States of America, if you really, really care about gun rights, you vote like it's your job. You vote all the time. And I'm not making a political judgment or a moral judgment here. It's just the way that they express themselves. Right now in the United States of America, if you really care about climate change, chances are you don't vote. Chances are you don't vote at all. Once we solve that problem, I'm happy to go on to doing something else.